All right, how's it going, everybody? Gamma Fighter here, coming at you with another Sylvaneth video. This time, I wanted to do a tier list format. We really dove into the War Scrolls. We dove into how we want to, or how we expect the game designers want the army to play and each unit to play. We dove into the numbers, and now I want to do more of a relational kind of a tier list ranking and how the units kind of interact and relate to one another. And I think that's better served here. Those other videos were already an hour long, and I'd like to do something that's just more compact, more of a summary, but also getting into some of the subtleties of between the units and why I rate them the way that I do. So first, the tier is going to be list defining. These ones are not necessarily the strongest war scrolls, but it's the units that I think are going to define the way that you build the rest of your army. And so, sort of looking at it from a top-down perspective, you're going to start with them, and the rest of the units that you pick are going to probably want to be based around what you pick out of the list defining tier. Next is the best option for a good role. This is where most armies are going to be pulling from this tier. These are just the best options that there are for roles that are not niches. They're just you're going to want them in your army. Okay, but situational is probably going to be a little bit of a step down, maybe not fulfilling the role as well, and or just not as necessary of a role. Niche is where you can get them to work, but generally you're probably just better off running some of the stuff from the top the um, higher tier. And needs a buff means that I just don't see a way to justify bringing these units unless they get buffed in the future. Uh, Essentially, yeah. So for list defining, let's start with Alarielle. She is the leader of the faction, so it's fitting to start with her. So she is a very big anvil, and I'm not going to go into detail on the War Scrolls. I've already talked about those, so if you do want the detail, um, you should watch my previous video on that. Um, she is very she's a big anvil. She's very durable, and but she doesn't have she's a lot of points that can do okay damage, but it's not very efficient damage. So you're going to want to compensate for that with the rest of your army being stronger. She also has the ability to bring a unit back to life on a 3-up at half strength, rounded up. And so you're going to plan your army based on that. You may want to do a couple of minimum size units like Kurnoths or Bug Riders so that they can come back with 2 instead of 3. And you're still getting, 60% of the value of that unit back when it comes back to life. Something to consider. Definitely worth building around. Then Belthanos, I think, is also list defining, probably a little bit stronger. For the most part, I'm not going to be ranking them within the tiers, but I will do that here. He's just been super strong in third edition when he was introduced, and he's still got a lot of the same abilities. Um, he also is a big body that's quite durable, though not quite as durable. He does okay damage as well, though not quite as good as Alariel because he's half the points, anyways. A little bit inconsistent because he's got kind of a low volume. He does have 2 rend, which is really good on all his attacks. Um, but his big ability that you're building around is that he can give 3 units run in charge each turn, no range limit or anything like that. He can also make a piece of terrain into a place of power and a wicked wildwood for the purposes of the battle traits. So those are the things you're going to want to build around. I don't really understand it, but it is that level of mobility he gives to the army is really, really strong, and it's historically been really good. And I'm hearing a lot of people having good outcomes using him in fourth edition as well. All right, and then the third play style is to not use these big centerpiece units and to kind of go for a more durable, outlasting the opponent type of play. I talked about it in my other videos, but I think the way that the faction pack breaks down, the game designers seem to want us to put Awakened Wildwoods near key points on the map, like in between objectives and in the center of the map, that type of thing, and then force force the enemy to engage us within range of the Awakened Wildwood, so we have access to a lot of our abilities that way. And with Alariel and Belthanos, you don't really need to do that. But if you're not going to bring them, you are going to need to rely on that. I put Lady of Vines to define that play style because I think she brings a lot to it. She also herself counts as an Awakened Wildwood for the purposes of the battle traits. So there's added mobility that she can bring to the army, and in being a fourth Awakened Wildwood, or by not needing to even succeed on the spell rolls to cast an Awakened Wildwood. But for me, it's really key too that she has a defensive rampage, but really the big thing is a 5-up ward spell that she can give. She gives a 5-up ward in an area of 12 inches around her, 12-inch bubble around her. Um, and that just really, really increases the durability of every unit and by a lot. And you can look at my deep dive on the numbers video to look at just how much it makes an impact. So I think these are going to be the three main play styles, and you're going to want to consider how you're building your army based on that. So let's dive in with the hammers. I think the Keroth Hunters with swords are the best option for a good roll. Um, they're the premier damage unit in the army. Um, I really feel like these are auto includes in every list, unless you can justify to me personally why you didn't bring them. They just do so much damage. Downside is they're a little bit slow. Um, I mean, they're pretty slow. They're 5-inch move. But the damage that they do is just, it can't be compared to anyone else in the army. They're just so far above and beyond everyone else. The Kurnoth sights do fall quite a bit short of that. Um, they just don't do as much damage, and their extra damage is when they get charged. But for a hammer unit, you want them to be charging. Um, I also in my previous videos didn't really touch that much onto the anti-X +1 rend uh, effects that some of the weapons have. I'll talk about that a little bit more here. The great swords have crit mortals, which is just way better. It's just so much better than rend. That it just bypasses the armor completely. Whereas the sides have anti-charge rend. There's some neat tricks that you can do with them, but it's really like they're trying to make a Keroth Hunter anvil. And Keroth Hunters are pretty durable for a hammer, but they're just not they're not anvils. And if you want a hammer, you're better off with the swords. The sides, like, in comparison with the rest of the faction, they're pretty good. They just don't compare to the very direct counterpart of the swords. They just fall so much shorter. I think 90%, 95% of the time, you're going to want the swords. If you're not sure, probably just go with the swords. Um, I say, okay, but situational, because in a vacuum, the sides are pretty good, but you really have to justify why you're bringing them instead of just bringing more swords. Um, and another hammer is the Spite Revenants. These guys need a buff because a reinforced unit costs exactly as much as a unit of Kurnoth swords, but they don't do nearly as much damage. They're just not as efficient. Um, and but they're less durable, they're less damage, and they cost the same. There's I can't really think of any reason why you'd want to bring them. If they lower the points, they would be more efficient, but not as much damage. They still wouldn't be that good, and I still think they wouldn't get taken that often, except maybe if they lower the points too much, there might be a spam list where they just run a ton of these guys. Even then, I don't think that's good. The Spite Revenants need a buff. Next, let's look at the next best hammer in the army. It's going to be the Spite Rider Lancer. Their damage, once again, it is a pretty steep drop off from the swords, but I believe they're pretty good second place at most damage ranges. Sorry, most armor saves. Um, you can refer to my previous video for the exact numbers where I deep dived on the damage. There is a drop off, but they're still very good compared to the rest of the army. and they have much higher mobility. So that's the advantage. You're trading off a bit of damage for so that added mobility. They have the same durability, except they don't have the built-in ward save that Kurnoths have. And the caveat is that they have +1 damage on the charge. And if they're not charging, they're doing half as much damage. And then their damage is really bad. So you do need them to be charging. They also have anti-cavalry +1 rend, which is situational, but cavalry is pretty strong in the current edition. The added mobility that cavalry has means that they're probably always going to be strong, fairly strong and fairly common. So it is a pretty good bonus to have. And when you're fighting cavalry, their damage does catch up to the Keroth Hunters a bit. Not completely, but it does narrow that gap quite a bit. Their counterpart is the Revenant Seekers. Their mounts have the charge +1 damage, but the riders do not, whereas the riders and the mount have it for the Spite Rider Lancers. You're getting mortal damage instead on the Revenant Seekers. That means that against like a 1-up and a 2-up save, the Revenant Seekers actually do more damage than the Spite Rider Lancers. But against every other save, the Spite Rider Lancers are the better damage dealers. Forgot to say they have Strike First, which is handy, but unreliable. It's on a 3-up when you charge only. But the Revenant Seekers, what you get in exchange for that is you get the rally roll. So thinking about when you're going to be using these things, they can help support something like a centerpiece model, or if you have like tree lords that you're using as anvils, they can do okay support. They can make it worth it to use your rally. Generally, it might not be worth it, and if you have the Revenant Seekers, that might make it more worth it for you to use their rally. They also get you to some interesting break points where you have about a 50% chance of bringing back a Spite Rider Lancer and about like a 45% chance of bringing back a Keroth Hunter. Returning a model to the unit of such strong units is very, very powerful, but it's not very reliable. So there's going to be times when you have like 4 damage on a Keroth Hunter unit, and then you rally, and if you get 4, then you're okay with that because you'll heal all the damage. If you get like 5 or 6, then you're going to be bringing a model back, and you're going to be super stoked. Some more hammer units are going to be the Keroth bows. Those I think are also the best option when it comes to just dedicated shooting units. And is pretty close with the Gossam Archers. I'll go ahead and just put those there now. But the Keroth Hunters, and I didn't really touch on the GHB rules when I did my review, but the Keroth Hunters are really strong when they're in the General's Regiment and they get the Honor Guard, where they get the +1 to hit and +1 to wound. Then they're shooting on 2s and 2s, which is just so accurate. They have 18-inch range, which for this edition is pretty long range, and they ignore the guarded hero ability, so they can snipe out these heroes, and they have anti-hero rend +1. They have a very good use. You reinforce that and you give them the +1 to hit, +1 to wound against the General's Regiment, and they're very impactful on the battlefield. And I think that's going to be a good role going forward, at least for this GHB. The Gossam Archers, it's pretty close. They don't benefit as much from being reinforced and then having the honor guard ability. They've got a smaller range, and but their damage is really efficient. It's shocking how much damage they do for how cheap they are, and pound for pound, point for point, they do more damage than the Keroth bows. But the shorter range and the bigger like coherency problems you have with them because their wings stick out so much, you can't pack them into a tiny place. There's just a couple downsides. So whereas, with the Keroth Hunters, there's a big gap in the power. With the the Bug Riders, the Spite Rider Lancers are quite a bit stronger than the Revenant Seekers. You really would only want to bring Revenant Seekers for that special edge case where you want to improve your rally rolls. For these two, they do play kind of different roles in the army, but when it comes to just when you're just looking at the damage, they're very close. I just think that the Keroth Hunters is a more reliable and useful ability in the army. But again, it is pretty close. Now, the kind of the reason I put Gossam Archers here is that they're between these two units, the Tree Revenants and the Keroth Hunters. They shoot like the Keroth Hunters, but they also should probably primarily be geared towards completing battle tactics and claiming objectives the way that Tree Revenants do. And since the there are two units that do those jobs better, like more specialized. That's why I'd put the Gossam Archers here. If you want to put them up here in the best option for a good role, I could totally see that. But just for the sake of saying like that these are just kind of the second best version of both of these units, I put them here in okay but situational. And speaking of the Tree Revenants, these guys are really good for capturing objectives that are left open. They earn you points, mostly for completing battle tactics. Um, Now you can only teleport once per turn for your whole army. So even if you have two Tree Revenants, you can't teleport both of them at the same time. I think it's great to be able to just pair one Tree Revenant with one unit of Gossam Archers for all your battle tactic needs. Um, I think that's a great role, but just the teleport is just so good at doing these movement things that you need to do, or positioning things for these battle tactics, that the Tree Revenants just are the best at it. So they get to go up there. I did almost skip over a shooting unit. I'm going to put Dryka in needs a buff. When it just comes to the shooting, it's not that great. And her combat doesn't make up for that, for her lack of power in shooting. And then her utility doesn't make up for her lack of power in just dealing damage. She just has a lot less utility than the Lady of Vines, and the trade-off should be that she does a lot more damage, but it's just not there. She does more damage for sure. She has a she has shooting. Um, Lady of Vines has one shot at range, which doesn't really count in my mind. So um, she does have shooting and stuff, and I don't want to take that away from her, but I just can't conceive of running her at her current points cost with the current kit that she has. I feel like she should be costed less than Lady of Vines, but she costs more. So, um, as we're looking into, well, let's finish up the needs a buff tier. The twist wield, I just don't know what it does. It seems like they're just Tree Revenants that don't teleport, and that seems like the the worst war scroll in the whole army. So maybe they do something. I'm not aware of their uses. If you do know, please let me know. I would love for these guys to be good. Um, so yeah, moving on, let's transition to our anvil units, and we'll do something of a hybrid. I consider the Spirit of Durthu to be something of a hybrid. It's not going to be able to do as much damage as a reinforced unit of Keroth Hunters. Um, but the damage is pretty efficient for the points cost, and it's one big body, which is an advantage. You can heal back those wounds, and you don't have to worry about if you lost a model or not, and then having to do a rally roll. You can just heal the wounds back, and even when he brackets, like, he doesn't lose that much damage. Spirit of Durthu is a really, really great option, and usually he's the only non-unique um, leader that I have in my army. So I usually end up putting my heroic trait and my artifact on him because I don't have another choice. So the Tree Lord itself is more of a pure anvil unit, very durable, very efficient, because it's, the Belthanos and Durthu and the Tree Lord Ancient and the Tree Lord have the same defensive profiles, but the Tree Lord is the cheapest, and so that makes it the most efficient from a defensive durability perspective. Also has some synergy, has some anti-charge, has a rampage that lowers the enemy damage. So I think it's a really good anvil unit. The only reason I put it in situational is because not every army that you build in Sylvaneth is going to need a dedicated anvil unit. For example, like Alariel and Belthanos kind of already fill that role for your army, so you probably don't need a tree lord to be another anvil. You may, and I think that's totally a viable way to play. But I think a lot of people are going to want to invest more into offensive power when they've sunk many points into these less less offensively efficient units here. So, but yeah, in the one with the Lady of Vines, I think Tree Lords are a great pick. A Tree Lord with a 5-up ward is nuts. It's very tough. So, um, I'm tempted to put the Tree Lord Ancient into niche because the advantage that you get is you get a wizard +1, or a wizard 1. Costs quite a bit more. But yeah, they don't do very much damage for how many points they cost, and having them cost more means that they're just less efficient at damage and at durability. I kind of think that they belong here in the okay but situational, though, when I consider just how strong manifestations are. Um, the Tree Lord Ancient can summon a manifestation every turn, including during your opponent's turn. And we have quite a bit of access to wizards, so you don't necessarily need another wizard. But like that's just such a strong ability that I think, like, when I'm comparing the Tree Lord and the Tree Lord Ancient, um, I feel like the Tree Lord Ancient is actually quite a bit stronger when you consider uh, that it can summon manifestation every turn. You can summon a purple sun. I know they're not guaranteed to come out, but like over the course of a game, if you've attempted to cast um, manifestations 5 times, which you can even do more with the magical intervention, but even if you just do it 5 times, like that, you're gonna summon quite a few times. You're gonna have a huge impact on the battle. So I kind of have to put them here. Um, and I think the naming of this a tier above, it just saves it from having the Tree Lord Ancient go in there, because it's not the best option for a good role. It's just okay but situational. Um, Now rounding out our defensive units here, I've got the dryads. It's tempting to put them into niche, but I think, yeah, probably just okay but situational. They're surprisingly hard to lift. Like they're just looking at the defensive profile, they look like they're just screens. They're just made of paper, and you can use them that way for sure. But when they're with near an awakened wild one and they get -1 to hit, -1 to wound, they're surprisingly difficult to shift. Um, and you can give them a 5-up ward with the Lady of Vines, a 6-up ward with Keroth Hunters or the Warsong Revenant. They can be really, really good defensively. And I particularly like them in an army with like Belthanos or Ariel. You've kind of already spent a lot of points on an anvil. You probably don't want to be buying a whole Tree Lord, but you could buy an army of, or sorry, a unit of Dryads and have them lock down another point, and be a bit of a tar pit, and have Alariel or Belthanos be kind of the focus of your opponent, but have the Dryads be more of like a speed bump and kind of tie up an enemy, so that either a hammer unit can come in and clear them up, or like they can just delay them capturing an objective so that you can capitalize on that. I think it's pretty good, and of course, when you can get them a 5-up board with the Lady of Vines, that's really good too. So I see there's a pretty good argument for putting them in any of the 3 main army types that I've been talking about. So I'll leave them as a okay but situational. All right, next I'm going to put Arch Revenant and Branch Witch into niche. They both kind of fill a similar role to me, which is that they're pretty cheap for being a hero. And if you're trying to maximize your units that you're using and minimize the number of heroes, for example, if you're doing like a Balthanos or an Alariel, you want to really pack in like a bunch of Keroth Hunters and Spite Rider Lancers. If you can't fit everything into one drop, I can see adding these cheaper heroes as your second drop, and they have a bit of utility, especially in like a Belthanos list with a bunch of Keroth Hunters. The Arch Revenant can possibly give their buff to more than one unit of Keroth Hunters, and then they might be worth it, kind of. You're really like kind of building around her, and she still doesn't perform that good, but I can see how people would want to try that, and maybe it could be effective. I say niche because you're probably better off with one of these other choices. But if you need a hero that's cheap, well, she can do it. Same with the Branch Witch. She's even cheaper. But she's a wizard, so yeah, if you you could summon manifestations with her, sure. And if she could fit in another hero's regiment, she'd be better. But since she takes up a whole drop, it's really just if you're trying to minimize your impact of your other heroes, she can do that. So yeah, I think they're niche. Probably don't want to bring them, but I can barely see an argument for it. All right, and then Warsong Revenant, I think is the best option for a good role. And this one is a little bit sort of tough. Um, I kind of do have to explain the War Scroll. Wizard 2 is pretty good. It's not durable at all. It has +1 to unbind, which is pretty rare and could have a pretty good use, especially if you can unbind the manifestations. I just realized I don't even know if you can unbind manifestations in this edition. I haven't read that part yet. I really haven't been paying attention. But he gets +1 to banish as well. So if you're just going to banish, then that gets +1. But the thing that I think pushes it over the edge is it does something that nothing else in the army can do. It's provide an unconditional, persistent 6-up ward. That's strong, guys, especially when we consider that pretty much all of our hammers are like pretty durable. Um, the the 6-up ward like just improves their durability. Like it's a multiplier effect on durability. So the our hammers are like pretty durable, but they're not so durable that they can't be just wiped out completely. Um, like so I guess what I'm saying is like it's sort of built into the cost for our hammers to be durable, but against other like really strong glass cannon hammers in other factions, they can still get lifted. So having an additional like this ward save to help them kind of hang in there is pretty valuable. Um, and it can extend their longevity. So I think that's something, obviously I've talked a lot that I think the game designers are pushing us towards a more durable play style and away from the teleport shenanigans. And I think the Warsong Revenant, like having a 6-up ward that just doesn't, it's persistent. You don't have to cast a spell. You don't have to be on an objective. You just have it when you're within 12 inches of the Warsong Revenant. I feel like that's something really good. I think that's the best option for that role, which is persistent award. So I'm going to give it, I think the other stuff is really good as well. And that award tips it over the edge to being the best option for a good role. So that's it. That's everything I have. I didn't really touch on Draika's anti-infantry, so maybe I'm not giving her enough credit there. I think it doesn't do enough to bring her damage up though. Um, yeah, I think that covers everything. Please let me know your thoughts. Um, let me know. Oh yeah, and and I mean I kind of already covered this, but I think you're pretty much going to be starting with one or two of these list defining hero units, and you're probably going to want to pick most of your the rest of your army from this top list. And if you're going to pick something beneath it, from okay but situational or down, you're going to have to really consider why you're doing that. What does it accomplish for you? Um, I mean, except the Gossam Archers, they're pretty good. Like they're pretty good. So I do want to share some lists that I kind of have come up with, and you'll see that a lot. You'll see a lot of Spite Rider Lancers and Keroth Hunters. It's like, well, because they're good at what they do. And what they do is help you win games. So I'm look forward to that, and I'll share that. And yeah, if I got anything wrong, if I'm missing something about some of these units, especially like Drika or the Twist Wield, please let me know. And I'd love to be wrong, especially about Drika. I really liked her in third edition, and I'm really sad to see what they've done to her in fourth edition. So that's it for me, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys in the next one.